Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Adventures in Historyland YouTube channel. Today, our guest is all the way from coming to us all the way from the United States. It is the historical author Avellina. Is it Balestri?
Balestri.
Balestri, thank you. Yes, I'm very sorry about that, but nevertheless,
You are not the
you
first, you will not be the last.
well, it's so. I mean, I could have just asked you to introduce yourself, but that seemed to be a very lazy way of starting out the episode.
Very much welcome.
I'm a very lazy creature, but we have to try and put some effort into this. So we're here today to talk about many things, I think, so the walrus said. And we're going to be specifically talking about events that surround and relate to your newest book, I believe.
Yeah, my newest, well,
Newest
last
novel?
year's novel, yes.
Newest
'Cause
novel.
I released a poetry book after that, but yes, latest novel. So we're gonna,
Excellent. Excellent. Yes, the latest novel. As you might have guessed from the reference to, I recently wrote a book of poetry. Avelina wears many hats, as she just told me. And so if you go to her website, which you will find the link below, you'll find all the things that Avelina is doing. This is the point. This is the call to action point where I would like you to go and check out what Avelina is doing. Check out her book. Obviously, we'll give you lots of reasons to do that through the rest of this episode. And if you get to the end of the episode as well, please like and subscribe on the way out the door. It's very appreciated. Now, so the first thing that comes to mind, and probably the question you get asked a lot, is um, sort of why did you choose this particular moment in history to write about? For those who are wondering, that specifically references the Saratoga campaign of 1777, fought during the American Revolution, the classic turning point of the American War of Independence, and one that the British lose very convincingly, just shockingly well. We lose it
yeah.
very well.
It
Um,
was sort of like I almost feel like a combination of a Shakespearean and an Arthurian level tragedy that was sort of brought into being with that. It just had everything. It just had everything in terms of what could go wrong and what did go wrong.
yeah.
And it was almost what do they say, a level of art in terms of in terms of
Yeah,
disaster.
there's a certain artistry to the level of just the increasingly bad situation General Burgoyne manages to get into. Because
Mhm.
to begin with, it starts out like it's a fairly decent plan to begin with, but we'll get to that in a second. So this is um, a very important part of the American Revolution, but it's not one that I think that has been particularly novelized a great deal. So, what drew you in this direction?
Sure. So I have had a long-term interest in Saratoga in part because of the characters who were involved in it. So I always really liked General John Burgoyne. He's this fascinating, colorful, multifaceted character, a playwright and sort of a scholar who can, you know, create art and wage war. And he's been in these various campaigns prior to what goes down in the American Revolution with his regiment of horse, and he becomes this sort of dashing, heroic figure with them. And he has a certain chivalrous, knightly streak about him, and he just has a lot of yeah, pizzazz to him. So I always really liked him, and he was fundamentally a decent human being as well. He was very generous to his friends, humane to the men who fought under him, and just overall a good guy with flaws, with lots of flaws and
And
weaknesses.
that's good for
Yeah,
novels. That's good. We like
it
that for
is.
novels, right?
We do. I mean, it is. It's one of those things that makes for a compelling character to follow along the
Hmm.
trek. And then you have, his secondary, um, you know, top brass in General Simon Fraser of Balmain, this Highland Scot who had been in exile in the aftermath of the 1745 Jacobite rebellion, who then serves as a mercenary for the Dutch and is eventually kind of reconciled to the British government, becomes an officer during the 7 Years' War, and eventually winds up rising beyond what they originally were allowing Highlanders from, Jacobite clans to do. So originally they're brought back over in order to just sort of give orders to their own clansmen, because they say these people are so clannish they won't listen to anyone else. And
There's
they weren't
also the
supposed to be
language barrier as well, but yeah.
language barrier in part, depending on, again, like you point out, yeah, definitely there are those who only spoke Gaelic. And then there was a lot who didn't. They were a lot of, multilingual people. I mean, Fraser himself was quite multilingual. It seems that he could speak not just English and Gaelic, but also French, German, and Dutch. So, the man certainly got around, and you see him rise therefore out of where they're holding him in this, well, you're just going to do this, and soon he rises above that, and he is giving commands, and he has risen to rank over Britons of every stripe. And so he ends up, of course, in the Saratoga campaign at the head of the light infantry, and he's just such a dynamic character. They call him a host in one man and the soul of the army. And then thirdly, you have General William Phillips, who's in charge of the British artillery. He comes from a long line of Welsh knights. He has one very famous relative who served under Richard the Lionheart and gained not only the title as Defender of the Holy Sepulchre, but also the Lionheart allowed for him, as a sort of a nod to his services to him, to put a lion on his crest. So he has, and many other relatives. Again, this Welsh line is just absolutely chock full of memorable figures who held the cups and spurs of kings. So you've got him, and Phillips is this very dynamic character as well, and he famously has a line that many people know who know the Saratoga story, that when he is going to pull his guns up a rise to try and combat the rebels who have taken Ticonderoga, Fort Ticonderoga, he says, where a goat can go, a man can go, and where a man can go, he can drag a gun. And so he, too, is just so much fun to write. So the three of them, really, the trio, just a wonderful bunch of people to write. So that was in part why Saratoga was a draw, the people involved, but also the element of kind of almost horror movie from the perspective of the British and the loyal Americans. Really is a horror movie. It's a situation where almost Jurassic Park-like, and it's funny because as I start to write it, I have taken inspiration from sources on Saratoga. One of my favorite being the writings of Sergeant Roger Lamb, who experienced the Saratoga campaign. He was a massive inspiration. He really helped me get into the element of horror, actually. He captured it very well. The soldier's experience of horror as things just get worse and worse and worse. But also, I did take inspiration from different films that you wouldn't ordinarily necessarily immediately connect with it, ranging from like the Russian film Come and See, to, again, Jurassic Park, the idea of, things, this is going to work out just fine, and no, it doesn't. Titanic, the whole Titanic story, to a certain extent, has a similar trajectory, and as I mentioned, Shakespearean tragedies and Arthurian tragedies, the Battle of Camlan, because ultimately, fundamentally, the thing that I think everyone should remember is the American Revolution was a civil war between people of common ancestry, language, and up to that point, allegiance. So the horror that comes out of civil war has a particular place in this. And the turning point element, that there's so much at stake with this, that it's therefore, and the environment of the wilderness, it just provides this rich backdrop. I'm not a big fan of the film version of Last of the Mohegans from the 90s, but one thing they got right was the sense of the lushness of the wilderness and that certain horror vibe that comes with that. So I was taking inspiration from that as well. A little bit from movies, you know, like a folk horror film like The
Hmm.
Witch from A24. And I kind of took all this and said, you know, there's a lot of room here to try to explore this in a way that I don't think has been explored, in the sense of leaning into certain horror elements, almost of slow burn horror. This is kind of what I lean into, as well as, due to other aspects of it, I was trying to lean into. And this is something that I've done in my previous, because my previous novel is the first book in a Robin Hood retelling series. So I lean into this as well, the medieval mystery plays. So I'm a great reader of medieval and dark ages of stuff. So the medieval mystery plays, the Anglo-Saxon poets and Celtic poets from that period. And so they have a wonderful sense of tragic heroism that they put into their work, and also spiritual parables that they place in like mystery plays and things like that. So I tried to take inspiration from all those things, and I found that Saratoga was just a very good backdrop to explore what I wanted to explore.
Okay, so it's a Saratoga done as a disaster movie,
Yeah,
kind of idea, which is so it's
yeah.
a that's a fun take. That's a good idea. That's a good way to go, I think, with a war with what is essentially a war subject.
Mhm.
To treat it as a disaster movie, especially if you're looking at it from the losing side.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the main thing that sort of it makes your particular book stand out is that it is from the British side rather than the American side, whereas I'm sure there's been more done on the American side in the victory and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, it's a fascinating cast of characters. I remember doing a very long and unnecessarily long Twitter thread back in the day when that was a thing about the Battle of Saratoga and the campaign. And it was so fun to look at. There's so many great resources for writers to look at. There's Burgoyne's letters. There is several British infantry members of the British infantry. One is Lamb. Another, I think there's another one as well. And there's also a guy from the British artillery who's not the general as well, who has a pretty good account, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
There's also Baroness Weitzel.
Oh
Um,
yes, I love her book. Mhm.
yeah, and I think there's another woman as well, if I'm remembering correctly, but I can't actually remember her name at the second. So it's packed full of sort of human contemporary insight to help you
Mhm.
get into that, which um, I was really surprised at. But it's at the same time, it's not too surprising because people have been writing about Saratoga for a very long time. So there's a great
Mhm.
wealth of material you can use. Um, but is the book sort of like in terms of what it's about? Is it about sort of Gettysburg, where it's about the actual people, or is there a fictional element?
So the trilogy, All Ye That Pass By, in the first book, the one that is actually published as of now, Gone for a Soldier, follows actually a historical fiction character, Edmund Southworth, who is a young man who comes from a Catholic recusant family in the north of England, in Lancashire, which at the time, and I believe even now, had the highest proportion of Catholics. And so they are, recusants are those who are refusing to take the oaths and acts that acknowledge the king or queen, depending on the time period, as head of the church in England, and refusing to attend Anglican services, etc. And so they therefore have to pay heavy fines, and they are cut off from all sorts of just interactions with the world around them in a really being a part of society way. Whether it comes to politics, you know, they're not able to vote, certainly not able to run for office. They are not able to go into law. They are not able to go into the military. They are not able at various points to own weaponry. So, and then also not being able to take part in things like hunting. And again, this varied from point to point. I'm not saying this was consistent all throughout, but it was a thing at times. And then other times they were not allowed to own horses. And so, and this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. Things varied a great deal in terms of, you know, everything from being able to access like physician care to being able to participate in gentlemen's clubs, depending on what rank of society you were. It was very difficult to be a recusant at the time. You were really being kind of pushed to the fringe of that society in the hope that you would just cave and take these oaths and acts and, you know, go Anglican. And one very famous story pertains to General Thomas Gage of American Revolution fame. His father and his father's cousin, basically, they came from a very, very Catholic family, all the way up until the aftermath of the 1715 Jacobite Rising. And basically, ultimately, this is when they start cracking down on Catholics heavier and they start confiscating horses. And so you have the Gages are like, the Gage cousins are like, no, don't take our racing horses, we will we will apostatize. And so that is what they do. And I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. There are so many stories really of that kind of thing happening, where oftentimes a family, for example, now General James Wolfe from the Battle of Quebec fame, his family remains staunchly Catholic all the way until roughly the aftermath of the Glorious Revolution. They were considered an ethnically Catholic family, the Wolves. So it's very interesting how they were quite kind of recent when you get down to it in the timeline. It was Wolfe's grandfather who had apostatized to the Anglican Church. So all this to say, Edmund, also called Ned in the story, comes from this background and struggles to try to reconcile his Catholic faith, his loyalty to his family, his sense of family pride and obligation and identity, with his desire to no longer be seen as a coward at best, a traitor at worst, and living under that shadow. So when his father dies, it so happens that General John Burgoyne, who had been a friend of his father, comes back into the picture, helps the family financially, and sort of takes Ned under his wing a bit, takes him down to London on a bit of a tour where Ned ends up meeting quite a few historical characters, including King George III, but also General Gage, Major John Pitcairn, and Hugh Percy. So there's all this happening over time in the course of the story. There's a long build. I mentioned it's slow burn. Ned ends up getting persuaded to take the Test Act and go into the military as a young officer on General Burgoyne's staff during the Saratoga campaign. So that's how he gets there. And so, you know, we experience it through his eyes, essentially.
Hmm.
And so we get to meet the various characters, Burgoyne, Fraser, Phillips, particularly Fraser becomes, I'm writing book 2 now, so it's kind of fresh in my mind, but Fraser essentially becomes the main historical character of book 2, because Ned ends up being switched from Burgoyne's staff to Fraser's staff by the second book. So this is a lot of focus on his
Hmm.
personal journey, because he is struggling with, you know, a conflicted conscience about what he has done. But at the same time, he's now facing this very real conflict, which is getting, you know, kind of snowballing in a really bad direction,
Hmm.
that he's now caught in. But also trying to learn about the people around him, you know, and these
Hmm.
historical characters, and get a sense of them as he's sort of learning on the job. So that is the main trajectory of it, and just sort of following his sort of journey. And as he finds his like divided loyalties and struggling conscience just sort of hold to almost like a breaking point as things keep getting worse and worse and worse, and sort of seeing how he ends up coming out of that and what his destiny will ultimately be. So that's sort of the main
Hmm.
trajectory.
So it's sort of it could be characterized as that it's about a man trying to I don't know. It's a journey of faith. It's a journey
Yeah.
of
Pilgrimage.
acceptance.
Kind of
Uh,
a pilgrimage through the Valley of Death,
right.
in
He
a way.
has to put himself through something to to find his place in the world. And well, a
Mhm.
military campaign will do that for you.
It certainly
Um,
did.
yeah, there's many things we could dive into from that point. From that, I mean, where does the first book end? Don't tell me, we don't need to say how it ends, but what obviously if I know that if General Fraser is still alive, I mean it's history, guys. You don't need to be too surprised that
Yeah.
I'm indicating that he dies. But if he's still alive, you haven't reached Saratoga yet. The road to Saratoga
Right.
is ongoing. So where have we reached by the end of this
So,
historically?
exactly. So, yep, Fraser is still alive by the end of book one and into book two. In fact, basically, all right. So we've already been to the retaking of Fort Ticonderoga in book one, and we've already covered the killing of Jane McCrae in book one. The book, I suppose that's the last. Now that I think about it, major like
Okay.
historical point of book one. We still go on a little bit after that, but it's not strict. It's more like things that happen on the road.
Yeah. That's a
That happens after
backdrop.
that. Yeah, as a backdrop. But that is definitely a sort of historical pinpoint.
Hmm.
And so it's during the, summer basically
Yeah.
phase that is it hasn't hit autumn yet.
Hmm.
So it's the waning summer that
Okay.
then is going to shift over into kind of Indian summer and then into autumn of the next book. And then we get into the two battles of Saratoga
Yeah.
that occur in book two. So it's really the battle book.
Hmm.
Previously, in book one, we see mostly skirmishes. I mean, we do get quite a big skirmish in the aftermath of Ticonderoga because Fraser he gets his blood up and he goes chasing the rebels, and of course that creates a massive skirmish. I mean, it could almost be called a battle in and of itself, but the
I
point is
think it was. I don't remember exactly the name. There was one large what the army would have called an action.
yeah. So there's multiple. This is the thing. There's multiple engagements over the course of this that are either small skirmishes or so large that you almost might as well call them a battle.
Hmm.
But sometimes it's disputed by historians, like, "Oh, is it a battle?" Whatever it is. But it's bad. It's bad enough. Let's put it that way, for like in terms of cost and everything else. So that kind of thing, I think, is the buildup in book one. I feel like, in a way, book one spends the first half in England. So for the British viewers, actually, it gets like a lot of representation because we spend a good half of it still in England, and we kind of get adjusted to the world of 18th century Britain, which I think was very important to me from the get go because in too many American Revolution media things, Britain doesn't really exist properly. It doesn't actually exist as a real place with real dynamics and real people and a real strong sense of identity coming into this age of now sort of ascendant empire. So it's one of these in the aftermath of the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War. They are coming out as dominant after a very hard struggle. It wasn't an easy one, and they aren't. I think a misnomer with this is that they think, well, Britain is now the most powerful force with the most powerful everything ever. It's not quite true. No, but they still are on the up and coming. They just
The,
won a pretty decent. They won something pretty big, and now they are a
yeah,
force to be reckoned
the British Empire. This is one of the biggest myths of the American Revolution. It's one that
with.
is going to be parroted endlessly during the 250th anniversaries on the news and everything like that. We took on the greatest empire the world has ever seen, and we won with it's the classic Yankee behind a tree shooting at the mindless British redcoats mythology.
Mhm.
Um, and weirdly enough, the Saratoga campaign is one of the things that knocks that myth on the head,
It
actually.
does, yeah.
But the idea that the British Empire was like the most mighty military force in the world is not actually true. They had the financial capability to be the most powerful in the world, but they didn't have the army wasn't big enough, nor was it well trained enough. And at the
Mhm.
time, most people would have said it's the Prussians or the French or maybe the Russians who
Absolutely.
are actually the most powerful military force on Earth because it's just simply that the British have a lot of money and they're well organized, and you're facing uh, people who, if but the problem you're also facing a very rich bunch of colonies,
Yeah,
and they have good chances.
they
It's
do. People aren't really dealing with it in any kind of historically aware way because there is this kind of mythology. And also, I mean, everything you said is correct. Britain was not in this position of unlimited power and unlimited and unparalleled perfection in military. It just wasn't that way. Also, something worth mentioning that I mention quite a bit when I do the writing is that many of the young men on the Saratoga campaign were green. Like many of them in the
Mhm.
British Army. You had crack troops, yes, but many were not. Many were, in fact, in the officer corps. Many were young men, very young, like between the ages of 16 and 19, of good families who had never been in anything like this before. This was
Yeah.
supposed to be their first time out, and it's absolutely tragic when Roger Lamb captures it very well, but others as well, other writers from the period or from immediately after the period would remember the horror of it. It ended up being kind of a slaughter,
Mhm.
and so that isn't something we get familiarized with. But I also think
Mhm.
it's not fair to the American loyalists, and I can go on about this forever
Oh
because
yeah.
we have become deeply accustomed to, as Americans, identifying with the Patriots as being us. We are the Patriots, and it's like, well, are we though? Because literally, the country that's like honestly, it's a bit ridiculous. It's just as ridiculous as identifying with one or another sides of the later Civil War, like, oh, the Union or the Confederate was strictly us. Well, no, we were both, when you get down to it. And that's the case with the American Revolution, is that not only is it true that the loyalists were just as American as the patriots, and frankly, it would be nice if we actually treated it that way, and really understood it, that they are us, we are them as
Yeah.
well. We're not America. I think we sell ourselves incredibly short by making it like we just sprung into being in 76 or 83.
Mhm.
America as a land has so much more going on. My town is older than 76. It was founded in the 1750s. We still, needless to say, had a king. So we don't just come into being. A specific government system that becomes dominant in America, or our chunk of America, is
Mhm.
what comes into being in 76, or at least the beginnings of it, shall we
Yeah.
say. Um, but that's not all that we are. And quite frankly, I would think it would be more in keeping with being a proud American to say we've existed before this government, and if this government falls, we will exist after it. So, I mean,
Mhm.
in other words, the land and the, I suppose you might say, development of peoples and culture is
Mhm.
more truly what I think most people are attached to, as opposed
Probably,
to a
yeah.
specific government. So it's odd to me, I think,
Mhm.
when there's
As
an over the top emphasis upon, like, oh, this was the foundation of a specific government. And I'm like, when you think about most countries in the world, right? Governments change in different ways, even if it's not super dramatic, like in Britain, for example. It's not like a super dramatic break, like in France, for example, has recycled so many different governments at this point. But still, Britain's government, Britain herself, think about the long history of Britain, has changed in so many different ways and evolved, and it's still not
mhm.
reducible to the beginning or end of a governmental perimeter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, generally speaking, there are some high points that you can sort of hang your hat on as sort of definitive turns in the road, but it's much more complicated than that. And so it's a good idea for a book like this that you want to root it somewhere and then you want to go somewhere and have an experience where you take that knowledge and you go somewhere different and you test it against it. That's good. That's good stuff for novels. You have basically the first book in the trilogy as yet. Basically that covers the bit that the British are kind of happy about, right? Like you captured Fort Ticonderoga, which frankly, I mean, sounds impressive, but by this point, it's really, I mean, it seems like anybody can take it. But
Was a moral victory. It was a moral victory because the memory of Ticonderoga was associated with many things, not least the fall of Lord George Augustus Howe and the difficulty of trying to take it from the French and failing.
Mhm.
And then ultimately, of course, the British do get it, and then losing it to rebels is like
Mr.
a blow.
Allen,
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, and Benny Arnold,
yeah.
who will appear in this trilogy.
Yeah, and Knox and dragging all
Mhm.
those guns down to Massachusetts. Yeah, it seems like a big deal, but it seems like just that anybody who shows up at the door is taking it at this point. But obviously, it's a big fort, and if you defend it right, you can defend it like Montcalm did.
Right.
Um, and then you have, and so you basically the British are very happy. Burgoyne is very happy. His plan seems to be working. That plan, for those who are wondering, is essentially to come crashing down from Canada in through the Hudson Valley to try and sever parts of, the colonies away from each other. And the idea is to kind of meet up with General Howe coming up from the south, or whoever happens to be in New York at that time. It's actually General Clinton, because Howe has taken himself off down to Philadelphia.
Billy. Yeah.
So already, I mean, it is actually quite a decent plan. And the funny thing about General Burgoyne, like you were saying, he's not he's thought of as this kind of clown who messes up at Saratoga. At the time, he actually has more command experience than any other general, like active campaign field command than any other general in America. Howe is actually very good, but Burgoyne has been on independent command before, and this is actually Howe's first job as an independent general. And people have a lot of hope for him. He comes up with his great plan about he's got all these skirmishing ideas. He's going to employ the Indians. It's
You know what it is? It's Burgoyne reminds me so much of me sometimes. It's scary. Like I've been there where it's like you create this plan, and I've been in a lot of projects that I end up as like the commander over, and you have this plan, and the plan sounds really good on paper, and then getting that to actually come together. I've run conferences before. I've been involved in like concert stuff before. All of these things. It's just it looks great on paper, and you're trying to get everybody together, and you're like, if everybody just comes in now and does this, it'll all work swimmingly. It very rarely happens, and then you feel things start to break apart. One thing breaks, another thing breaks, another thing
Mhm.
breaks, and there's a part of you that wants to just plunge on ahead. This is I actually relate to Burgoyne, even in some of his most stupid phases during this, where it's like we need to keep going. We've gone too far. We've lost too much.
Yeah. The
We need to keep going, and it'll
the
just
the
work if we don't stop. Maybe.
Hey, hey, I mean, objectivity is very important. I mean, people like to give Burgoyne a hard time as if they could have done better. I mean, the problem with that ad with his, I mean, it's fun to do. I mean, he's the easy target for like joking around about the American Revolution. But the truth is, if you were in his position trying to do this, to enact this plan, which is yours, which adds a whole different level of pressure. Um, it's not as clear cut, and it was clear to me when I was working through the sources. I must have been in 2017, to be honest. That he the plan unfortunately basically derails as soon as decent opposition starts to occur. Like he
Yeah.
doesn't plan for how bad the roads are, and that once you push the Americans south, they all start getting concentrated, and it makes it easier for them to react to you. And then, of course, there's the murder of Jane McCrae, which alienates the main thing the Americans were scared of, and that was a horde of Native American allies descending on the on the frontier. And they're just like, well, if you're going to tell us what, like, if you're going to bring us here, why did you bring us here? If you're going to like keep telling us off, uh, and it's
It was a
unfortunately,
buildup of, yeah. It
it,
was a buildup of badness. Like each little thing built on the next little thing. And it was like Jurassic Park. It was like Jurassic
yeah,
Park. It was like,
it's a true disaster movie in multiple levels as he just rolls onwards and the Americans and unfortunately he comes up against good American commanders. Frankly, I mean it like they had Ben Arnold there, and they had Morgan's rifles, and they had some good opposition
and
to
as
make
you
the
said, it was concentrated by the
yeah.
time they got done because it was, but like you said, it was one of these things where he underestimated just how much territory he was going to have to cross. He really wildly did. And he
He
kind
pretended he was cool. He pretended he knew. He was like, "Yeah, it's fine. Don't worry. I planned for this."
he did. He was an actor. We love him for it, but oh man, was he an actor? It was like, no, 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 be cool, be cool. No, it's like a walk through the park on a Sunday afternoon. It's like, yeah, dude, this is not going to be that. And it's like, oh, we're gonna have some woodcutters.
Yeah.
It'll
Uh,
be fine.
you know that meme of the little dog in the burning house? Everything's
Yeah,
fine. That's the second book. That is fully at the
very
two
much.
battles of Saratoga, um, where he's just losing immense amounts of men. He's still kind of winning, but
Yeah.
like that's just because this quality of his troops are very good. And it's just it's like we were saying
He's
before. It's
winning downward. He's
yeah, it
winning
is. It's
downward.
one of those things where you just win, but you just can't win. It must have been so frustrating for him.
It was
And
like walking a treadmill. It was like walking a treadmill, and it was like, and then the mud, like again, by the time you get to the second
yeah,
book, so the first book, yeah, no, so the first book was like in the first half of the book, it's in England, and I feel like probably a lot of my main inspiration for that was like a combination of like actual classic British literature. It feels more, frankly, like Jane Austen and Lorna Doone or something than it
well,
does
it
American
should.
Revolution. It
Honestly,
should,
it should.
right? It should. It does, and I'm that's my sort of happy place to write. So I'm like, I want to lean into that classic British literature style. Really, feels a little like Lord of the Rings at points. Really, where it's like, no, I want to lean into that so that then we actually get a real sense for these people and the different parts of their world and so forth by the time we take them out here to the wilderness. So the second half of the book is the slow burn of the beginning of the campaign. So at first it's like, oh, we're setting up in Canada. We're setting up. We're trying to prep to get going. We're meeting the main characters. We meet Fraser and we meet Phillips and we meet Ackland and a number of other these people who are going to be involved. And then they start off and they start off. And so then we're meeting the different components of the army. So we get to meet some Hessians. We get to meet the Baron and Baroness von Riedesel. We get to meet some of the native tribes who are involved in this. And it's like, okay, it's not too bad yet, but you're kind of laying the groundwork that eventually something's going to hit. Because at first it's slow motion. It's like there's nothing really happening particularly. There's a little bit of like we hear off in the distance, but it's not hitting the guys who we're
Yeah,
following. It's
yeah.
like off in the train. There's been a few skirmishy kind of things happening, but not too bad.
Hmm.
There's been a few sabotage attempts along the road, but not too bad. But about like two-thirds of the way into the book, there's a scene which I think does sort of shift the tone quite dramatically. Even though it's been getting darker, it's not been pure happy-go-lucky, but there is a sense that at this point there's a particular sniper attack that
Hmm.
occurs which kills someone we know.
Hmm.
And at that point, it's, oh, nobody is actually safe.
Hmm.
There's actually a sense that this is way more dangerous than it was led to be. That you can't fully control these outcomes, and it's going to get worse and worse as you go. And so after that point in book one, you start shifting into again the
Hmm.
we can't fully control how these marksmen are
Yeah.
inflicting damage on us, and we can't fully control our own native allies because then you have the Jay McRae situation, and
Hmm.
we've underestimated the kind of damage that the enemy can wreak in these skirmishes in the
Yeah.
aftermath of Ticonderoga. There's a lot of points where it's like people are just underestimating stuff,
Hmm.
and you start getting this really like uneasy feeling for the gang we've been
Yeah.
following going down here. And so the last, again, way too much, but the last bit of book one is that another ambush occurs,
Yeah.
and it is quite bad.
Yeah.
And we lose other people we know, and it's
Hmm.
like, oh, this is getting worse. And Burgoyne is still trying to push it off as bumps in the road. It's bumps in the road, guys,
Yeah.
but it's getting worse.
It's not. I mean, by the point of the sort of the I don't know what the breakdown of relations with the native allies and the progress from Ticonderoga, which it was kind of late in the season for trying to. I one of his big mistakes was thinking he could get all the way down to Albany, that without like in a sync what after he'd taken Ticonderoga, not just waited for the next summer or spring or
It was
whatever.
stupid. It was
Um,
stupid. It was stupid.
he thought he could press on, and he had good officers. Fraser and Baron Reidsel pulled him out of a lot of scrapes. They were skirmishing in the front. You had the Battle of Hubbardton. And then there was the reverse at Bennington. And Bennington should have been kind of like an alarm signal that, okay,
Yeah.
we need to be a bit more careful now. Maybe we need to, we just lost a whole regiment of Brunswick Dragoons here for like, okay, maybe we should take stock. But, hindsight is 2020. And so
Britons never retreat, so said Johnny, incoherently to anything in
which
British history.
I mean is
Sounds good, but it's terrible advice.
when your general starts talking like that, a military commander starts talking like that, you should just probably find reasons to get out. Uh, just to because retreating is if retreating is something that armies do. You're supposed to be good at everything. If you can't retreat, then then you will just die eventually. I mean, Washington knew how to retreat. That man knew what he
He
was
really
doing.
did. He
Okay.
really did, man. He really did. Well, and it is. It sounds funny, but he kind of, in a way, won through retreating because he
Yeah.
sustained. Like that was the point. He needed to survive Washington. He didn't need to immediately win the big victory in
Would
a
have been
battle.
nice,
Would
but
have been nice. It would have been nice, but it was the survival
yeah.
that enabled that more
There's,
than an instant victory.
there's one thing that Washington had learned in the Seven-Year War is how to get the hell out of somewhere.
Monongahela.
Yeah.
And well, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is, and that's why in book two, we do deal with so in book two you basically, which I just crossed the halfway mark myself. It's so funny. I feel like Johnny. I'm in a project, and I feel like
Mm.
no, you must not retreat. You have to finish this book.
You're also dealing with two battles around the
Yeah.
same area over a fairly close amount of time. So,
Yeah.
hats off to you because that is going to get you way down deep in the rabbit holes just because
Oh,
of trying to
oh,
manage that.
the rabbit holes are so deep, and it's. But yeah, the tone. Yes, that was the point. In book two, it is now just a full on horror film, and
Yeah.
it's like slowly cranking. And especially because we're following it from Ned now with Fraser, and
Yeah.
Fraser, who is a very by nature lead from the front
Yeah.
guy. He's in charge of the light infantry. He's not a timid person. He's not a coward, but even he is starting to get like, you know, Johnny,
Yeah, well,
Johnny,
during the camp,
Earth,
yeah,
Johnny.
during the campaign, Fraser was considered like the guy who knew what he was doing because he was the guy in all the fights, right? He could depend on General Fraser to kind of hold things down. Burgoyne would take us there, but Fraser would be the guy who'd get us out of it, and he'd probably win the battle. And then usually von Riedesel would come up from a flank somewhere, having marched
Mm.
like ridiculous distance, and then just appear where he wasn't supposed to be, and the Americans would run away. So that tended to be the sort of the dynamics of
The
the
battle.
battles. Yeah, right. It's
And Phillips is there with his big guns,
yeah, he's got to bring
his
like got
baby.
all the artillery, which again very important to the British survival is the scattering of artillery through the different parts of during through the brigades. Um, and it's you can tell that from how the Americans react to it, how Arnold manages the militia and the Continentals and Morgan's riflemen. They're like, okay, well, you have to target these guys here because if we take out the guns, then we have a major advantage. And that guy on the
Mhm.
horse there, that guy, that Fraser fella, pot him.
Which will become a whole thing within the because the thing is, I also deal with the question of the 18th century codes of war ethics and so
Yeah,
forth, which were being very much disputed at this time
yeah.
because of this new mass use of inordinate targeting, is what the British would call it, and what Fraser's aide called it. One of his aides, who had been there, he described it as when he called
Mhm.
up to Fraser to tell him to either back up or get off the horse or something. He's like, "Sir, you are being inordinately targeted." So that was the way in which they would phrase it, and indeed, the shooting of Fraser, the way it was done, was considered skeev even by quite a number of those on the revolutionary side, because they thought it was uncomfortable to have an equal opposition commander targeted like that. It felt like an assassination. And so there was it's interesting how that
Yeah, it is
understanding gets turned on
because
its head in the aftermath, and you
if you
have war codes kind of go down the
yeah,
drain.
it's that unspoken thing, right? It's you know, you know what the annoying thing about the Saratoga campaign in a way for historians and stuff is that it first of all, it completely blows apart the idea that the British couldn't fight in woods or like were like just
Yeah.
these mindless, stoic, brainless, minions of some sort of foreign tyrant that you
Yeah.
get in like The Patriot and all these other sort of movies and things like that. That sort
Such
of
a historical film, The
right,
Patriot.
yeah,
So well researched.
and well, actually, we should talk very briefly about the American Revolution in fiction in a minute, but it's like that. But to continue with the point, it's like the problem is that it's kind of true. It's kind of the myth of the clever American behind the bush is kind of true. Like it's slightly true because there was like if you read the accounts, the British did complain about it from Bunker Hill all the way.
There's a part of me that actually has a heart burning for chivalry, and I understand why they didn't like the inordinate targeting. I actually do. I get they were too slow on the draw to roll with it after it was happening that much. It was like, why are they doing this? Like at this point, guys, they've been doing it for years. Like,
They've been doing it for
you
years, and
know,
so have we, is the funny thing, because we have whole light infantry regiments here whose
but they
job
weren't.
it is
The
to take aim.
thing is, I would say the light infantry, though, it was different than the sheer amount that was being used, like with Morgan's riflemen,
Well,
was a different level,
well,
different level than like the
let's
Jaegers. You have the
let's
Jaegers with the Hessians,
yeah,
but the Jaegers,
they have proper rifles. The Jaegers, those guys are actually there, taking aim and likelihood of shooting what they aim at. The thing with the other thing is that, but that's the thing, right? It gets exploded because like riflemen did not make up the majority of the American army. Right,
Mhm.
the Morgan's riflemen were a very specialist unit that
Oh
had
yeah,
been got like cobbled together by Morgan, who was a very impressive guy. He had the right idea. He said, "We have these skills. Let's use them." But most like line officers, like Washington, Gates, Arnold, and stuff like that, are like, we could just like beat them with our like they fight. We don't need to train every guy to be a marksman.
I think that well, the thing is, it depended again with regards to which battles and which locations. You do run into very early on. So, for example, at Lexington and Concord, the
Hmm.
kind of "we are being inordinately targeted" complaint from the
Which is
beginning, even before.
it's another weird thing, right, though, because those militia are all using smoothbore Charleville's Brown Bess
Yeah.
muskets, and
So it wasn't the
it's just
same
they're
thing that they
good
were
at firing. They're
firing.
just good at shooting and taking cover.
No,
It's the sneakiness, right? It's the taking
the
cover bit.
sneakiness. The sneakiness, which is being used in a widespread way. See, I think this is the difference. So it's not that the British or the Hessians never did this, or the French for that matter, or any of these are. It's not that it was a never thing, but the sheer, I mean, you can't really explain it any other way. The sheer amount of people who commented on this, it wasn't something they were familiar with. The amount of it happening was clearly freaking them out. The
This,
amount of it, the sustained amount, and the fact that you were hitting major targets, hitting Fraser freaked them the heck out. We have plenty of
yeah.
evidence that they not only considered it like horrifying to them, but also a war crime. They clearly considered it a war crime against them. That this
Well,
was how.
certainly his like he was a beloved figure at that point. So when he was shot, it was implied that it was like an aimed shot. And actually, I mean, there is some controversy as to actually who killed Simon Fraser. But it's
As with every person who's
you
ever been
know,
shot.
but it is a fascinating thing when you look at the history of the of warfare in America because and it actually speaks to the like what we were saying at the beginning
Mm-hmm.
about how you were saying how the British Army is not the invincible machine people think it was. These are lots of like green troops, guys who are just in the army. They're not all veteran troops who know what they're doing, especially not in the woods or in the fields in outside of Boston. What you're dealing with is guys who you no longer have the army of 1760. You no longer have
Yeah.
the army that took on the French and the Indians under Wolfe and Amherst that had
Mm-hmm.
big light infantry doctrines. They were very at home in the woods. Like they had rangers, all these guys doing
Oh,
this
yeah.
North. They called it the North American Scramble, and you know,
You think of Lord George
yeah,
Augustus Howe was
and
very famous for the need to use light infantry
and
and
William Howe as well.
oh yeah, yeah.
He had a whole thing about it. Um,
So they weren't this is the thing. They weren't stupid in the sense of like, oh no, we don't understand like woodland, like they had an
they had
understanding of the concept of woodland fighting. They weren't a complete like
yeah.
what? And I think people get confused because of the way that these guys would write about the inordinate targeting. So, like, have these guys never heard of this concept? No, it's not that. It's just, I think, the amount to which it was happening to them.
Yeah.
And it was different and to higher ranking figures at certain points. And so they were just getting like, it's constant, it's everywhere. These people are awful. We hate them.
Hmm.
I think it was also
Yeah.
trauma speaking.
Yeah. And honestly, it had gone into the heads of the army. It had gone into the heads of the army because of the amount of officers that had been killed at Bunker Hill, for instance. That was assumed to be because everybody was a crack shot. It wasn't actually the case. It was just because the officers were very prominently in front as targets, and they waited
Yeah.
till very close range to shoot. So
Now granted, they were taking very specific aim. So there's the whole shoot for the red coats,
well,
shoot for the reddest coats. So they really were taking very
exactly.
particular.
It's and that was the skill of the guys in charge at Bunker Hill was to get those militiamen to not fire early and to fire really late, so you are sure of hitting whatever you aim at.
Mhm.
And after like the first after the after the line stops, the officers come forward. So any other further shots are going to wipe away whatever's ever in front. But the Bunker Hill doctrine affected the Americans who thought that they could just set up behind any parapet and win, and the British as well who were like, okay, we have to watch it because these guys are all expert shots.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So they basically, well, yeah, one side got paranoid and the other side got overconfident.
yeah.
It's like, it's like you humans are very flawed creatures.
Yeah.
You are very-
Um, anyway, it's such a fascinating campaign to look at from a military point of view. It's great for backdrop for somebody going into for like somebody trying to going on the hero's journey, so to speak. He's going to go through a lot. So speaking
Yeah.
of like fictionalizing history, uh, we mentioned it a second ago with The Patriot. Okay, a film that a lot of people have very strong opinions on, but it's a movie as it represents how fiction has treated the American Revolution up to this point,
Mhm.
essentially. I mean, John Adams is also out there as well, which is very good television. But The Patriot is the one people love, and I think people love it because Gibson put in
Yeah.
just enough nuance at the beginning to make it seem like everything else had the same care and attention given to it.
Well, here's the thing. Mel Gibson knows how to tell a he knows how to tell an entertaining
Yeah, it
story.
was
It, it,
very
it can be historically the worst, but it's entertaining to watch, even when you know it's horrible. It's like so bad it's good. That's
exactly.
what
So, how my question is, how do you manage the balancing of authenticity with the storytelling? Because Gibson sacrifices, like, I can imagine it, like, I want to write novels at some point myself, so I can imagine the struggle that I will have eventually trying to figure out what I must sacrifice and what I can just let go.
you must
Be
sacrifice your soul.
Yeah, no. So how have you managed that balance of telling the story but also giving an authentic historical view?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, I think that fundamentally it is about the character. So what I try to do is to learn when it comes to the historical characters that are going to feature, even if it's a character who's going to feature for like one scene or something, I really will go well out of my way to research as much as I feasibly can about that character, whatever we have about them. And then obviously you're going to have to use your imagination to fill in the gaps, but I always try to make the imagination part build upon what already exists, not contradict it. And I've run into a lot of historical fiction writers who don't get this, and they're just kind of like, well, it's historical fiction, do what you want, essentially. And we don't know this, so I'm just going to do this. And I'm like, yeah, but it's in total contradiction to what we do know. So why would you do that? And so for me, it does come down to a responsibility. It's an ethical issue for me, to try to do right by the dead. It is important to me, and I don't want to willfully mess things up. Like, again, things are gonna obviously, there's no way when you're doing historical fiction you're gonna get everything right. But you want to know with a clean conscience you tried your best to be fair to them, to present them as human,
Hmm.
and not simply tropes, fulfilling tropes or fulfilling some kind of necessity of your story in a template.
Yeah.
That's another thing. It's a tricky thing because, sure, as a story goes, as you say, there's a certain entertainment element which tropes and templates serve that. There's things people expect from a story, and it's okay if it works. So in other words, it's okay to have certain characters fit certain template design if it works to a point. I think that in the story you definitely have Johnny as the kind of flawed mentor to Ned. So that's a certain trope type. And also as sort of the tragic hero element, of him, again, being like an Arthurian knight almost in a way who goes out on this great quest to try to redeem the lands of his king.
Hmm.
And then everything goes wrong because of well, things that are in the
It's what
environment,
c'est
but
la guerre.
exactly, and flaws within himself. And so it's and the same thing with like Fraser is himself, um, a figure who straddles two rebellions. He comes in, you might say, to the story as we meet him trying to crush a rebellion,
Hmm.
but his, youth is spent running away from the aftermath of a rebellion that his clan took part in. So he is
Well,
trying
I mean,
to
the phrases
rectify.
and the phrases in the 45 are infamous for their
Oh
double-sided
yeah.
coin.
The phrase, well, that's the thing is that the phrase, and that this gets brought up a lot within the story, is that the Frasers have a reputation. They have a reputation not only for, yes, sitting on the fence, walking the line, figuring out when to do what, which will be most advantageous to them, and often splitting down the middle or zigzagging when it comes to
Mhm.
politics and religion. But also, like, fundamentally, they are a mafia family. We gotta remember, like, they were feared up in the north, and this is something that will come up
Yeah,
periodically, especially with Ned, this young Englishman, now working for this
a lot of
Highlander from the Frasers. The Fraser, he has certain perspectives of things and certain things he's willing to do and places he's willing to go, which
yeah.
make Ned uneasy because of that background. And he knows what it is to be on the losing side of a rebellion. He also knows what it is to try to shift to come off of that. And he also knows what it is to be constantly questioned about whether you can be trusted, about whether you will
It's
fight to the end, to the death for something,
the funny thing is that so many Jacobites who ended up on the in quotes Tory side in the American Revolution, um, such as Moores Creek Bridge, Flora MacDonald recruited men for the king. It's much less clear cut than people think. And so I'm glad to hear that you're trying to find that nice balance. And character going with character is a good way to make that happen. Uh, Very briefly, how has the response been? Because, I mean, you are writing about the baddies.
Well, this is what's interesting. I mean, it depends, obviously. It is okay. So as I mentioned, as I mentioned, I wrote a Robin Hood book first. Everybody loves Robin Hood. Robin Hood is popular. People will like Robin Hood and will just read Robin Hood because Robin Hood is on it. So, and I mean, they'll have their own like little idiosyncratic complaints about different things, but still, generally speaking, people will gravitate to Robin Hood. Then I do this. So it's a different whole level of what like people, are able to get in with because it is like there's a number of things that make it pretty niche. One is, yeah, we're dealing with the British experience of the American Revolution, the Saratoga campaign, which is in and of itself pretty niche and the way it is. But secondly, we're dealing with the Catholic recusant experience and Ned's full background story, which is also quite niche. Combining those two things is incredibly niche. And then you have the fact that it is very slow burn. So somebody is going to have to want to kind of spend time mostly in the frankly English countryside for a good long time of it. I mean, we do have trips to London, so that but the point is, you're gonna you're gonna have to really give over to that kind of environment for a while until you finally get to North America. And even then, it is very slow burn. So you're going to have to really love the characters by
This
then
is
in
this
order
is
to stick in.
keying you up for book two. And
It is. It is.
I've
I'm
just real
hoping that it'll get them there.
exactly. I've just realized where you said this is a trilogy, right?
Yes. Book
Okay.
three is the aftermath of
I was
hell.
gonna say back book three is gonna be interesting because I'm figuring that Ned is gonna end up captured. But don't give anything away. We'll have to see. I mean,
Well, to give you this much that book one ends just before the actual surrender. So when we open in book three, it actually leads into the surrender and then the aftermath for Ned,
mhm.
which again, like I said,
We'll
how
have
much
to
I'm going to
see.
say.
That's
Yeah,
gonna
the
be interesting
aftermath,
because we could have
yes.
some proper like POW stuff we could be seeing in the 18th century. Um, and there's a whole bunch of war movies you can take inspiration from that. But
Loads.
alas,
Hogan heroes.
we've probably come to the end of the usable time we can do for this episode. Avelina, thank you so much for joining me today on the Historyland channel. And I hope
Thank you so much for having me on.
yeah, I hope we'll have you back and chat about other random history stuff at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Quebec.
excellent.
Quebec. We should do Quebec. We should do Bad Luck Quebec.
Yes, we'll do a ramble about Quebec and other sort of horrendous events in North America. Um, so okay, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again for another adventure in History Land very soon. Take care, everybody.